And then there's things like simple things like the health impacts of lighting. Like, it's all very well to go and light our homes with lots of LED lights, but making sure it's the right type of lighting. My home is the hideously bright white lights that can disrupt circadian rhythm, melatonin production. Melatonin plays a really important role in regulating excess estrogen, which is linked to breast cancer. So something as simple as making sure we're getting the lighting right in our homes can reduce our cancer risk. Yeah, so the focus what I'm really focusing on in the mastermind is the deep dive into the health and environmental impacts of the materials, with a huge focus on how to assess the mold susceptibility of materials, what sort of criteria to consider. And also this year, a lot of my time this year has been spent going over my previous research and really looking at what are the manufacturers saying about the mold susceptibility of products, what do the studies say, and what have mold testing technicians observed, often quite different. And then also looking at, design strategies to reduce mold risk. But yeah, the construction stage is a big focus as well in terms of protecting those materials from moisture.
And what kind of things have you been teaching in that regard, in terms of how industry needs to think about the construction process to really avoid mold becoming a problem in the finished home?
Yeah, I think a big one is, I know that builders have been having problems with a lot of the timber framing being delivered to site already moldy. So I've been encouraging them to start having conversations with their suppliers about how they're storing the timber, because they won't be able to accept timber that's already contaminated. Moisture testing it before the walls get sealed, drying out the concrete slabs before the flooring is installed. They're the big ones.
Yeah, I know that we spoke about during the mini mind, builders using dehumidifiers and things like that to be able to dry the slab out before any flooring goes down, using strategies like that to make sure, and because obviously they're working to a timeline. They probably can't leave the slab for weeks and weeks and weeks and also, hedge their bets on what the weather's going to be doing. But a dehumidifier can be a really great way to accelerate that process.
Yeah, I told my mentor in Canada that builders in Australia were doing that. He's like, that is kung fu. I've not heard of any builders doing that. If you know of a builder that's doing that, that's the sort of builder I want to be building my home. The other thing that I think is important is the testing for water leaks. So I noticed Sean at Tassie Builders blog on his Instagram recently, he's helping build his mate at Sonoto's house, and because it's his own build, sorry, can we actually pause that?
Yep.
Sorry, because I'm just trying to not get builders in trouble here.
Yes, all good.
So Sean at Tassie Builders blog was showing them doing the water testing of the weather resistive membrane. So, if there's any penetrations, you want to make sure they've been properly sealed, and doing that before the roof and the cladding goes on. And that's not something that's typically done during the construction stage. It does add extra time to a build, but it's definitely something that I would want to happen on my build.
Yeah, I know, having a chat with Hamish White from Sanctum Homes, who's also a member of our mastermind group in Live Life Build. And so, he's a passive house builder and builds, even if it's not a passive house certified home, he'll build it to passive house standards as much as he possibly can. And one of the checks that he always does is, after the building's wrapped, is looking at then spraying it down. I remember Stuart Shelton doing it at Ballina as well. I went there and visited that site. And Dan from ProClimber was there doing a demonstration and showing, the windows taped and then hosing down the windows from the outside. Yeah. And I think that's the thing, is like, that's actually what happens in America. They have that weather resistant barrier be the waterproofing, or not waterproofing, but the weather resistant lining to the home. So then the cladding is the insurance policy. It's not the thing that is required to do all the jobs. The cladding is sort of that extra thing on top. And then but what's really fascinating in talking to Hamish about it, and how he's shared with the other builders, is what it then affords you is you can basically get the frame up, get the building wrapped, test that it's doing the job that it needs to. And then, in a location like Victoria, where the weather's, a bit hit and miss, and, you can be having rain one day and all that kind of stuff, they can still be continuing work inside, whilst they then, wait for it to be dry outside to continue the work that they might need to do externally. And so for him, it's worked both from a values point of view, a building quality point of view, a performance point of view, and a streamlining of his construction process point of view. And I think that, I'm seeing builders now in Queensland who might not have had the same, in the past, haven't had the same weather concerns that we might have had in Victoria. But now, because of the impact that climate change is having on the weather, it's a little less predictable. They're starting to think of strategies like this as well that they can use. And I'm seeing too, builders will then also start to look at how they can prefab whole wall elements. So there's basically the timber frame, all of the weather resistant barrier, all of if they've got an Intello lining on the inside, all of that comes as a one modular unit pre-done, so that the walls get put together very quickly. And it just accelerates that construction process. It prevents timber sitting out in the environment and potentially getting wet, which then, saves them time in not having to wait for it to dry out. And this is the thing, I think, as I saw this incredible video only yesterday, actually, on social media in the States. They were going through the stats for construction, and they were talking about, I think for every 5 builders retiring from the industry, there's only one entering. Wow. So in terms of the rate at which the availability of labor and expertise in the construction industry is disappearing, because it's just not a career that is being chosen at the same rate that it was, and they were talking about the fact that I think 20 or 30 years ago, the average age of a builder was around their early 30s. Now it's around their early 40s. And so, and some people have actually said they think it's around their 50s. And so just that, the looking at who's going to be retiring soon. It was this really fascinating video about just what the industry is looking like. I know that we've been hearing prefab being on the radar for probably, I think for 15 years, I've been hearing it's going to be the way to build in the next 5 years. So I think that there's lots of opportunity for how builders think about this stuff. And I love that, they're thinking about, testing that and making sure that the building is keeping water out with that weather resistant barrier. And that is a check that can happen just during construction, and then things can keep moving. And that's something that you can, as a homeowner, ask if you're specifying a weather resistant barrier and you're going to the effort to include that and then to have it detailed, and, speaking to a company like ProClima, what's really great about ProClima, for example, and we're going to have Jessie Clark on the podcast soon, is that they have builders as their suppliers who then come out and help train how these things get installed. So, the
ProClima guys, all the reps that I've spoken to around the country are just so amazing, so knowledgeable, so passionate about educating others and improving the industry.
Yeah, so I think that's really exciting, as well as seeing that knowledge sharing happening. It's a lot more collaborative, and that can only improve things as well. So now, what do you think is still lacking in the update? So, I love that you're excited when you saw them, obviously initially overwhelmed. I know that that's been how most industry have responded, is like, because it's not only obviously all the changes, but the whole structure of the document has changed. And when you get used to reading something one way for a few decades and then all of a sudden it looks completely different, that can be challenging.
Oh, wow.
So what do you think still needs to come? What are you hoping will sort of start to be thought about and included in perhaps future iterations, and that homeowners still need to have on their radars?
Yeah, so I think it is important to be aware that it does only address roofs and walls, and it doesn't necessarily address all the things in roofs and walls that, like we've already touched on. Foundations are really important, making sure that a home is built on the right foundation for the site is a big one, because you don't want rising damp in the foundations. And then there's other things like, at the moment, the construction code doesn't consider the health and environmental impacts of building materials. I'd love to see that in the future. And then there's the big electromagnetic field can of worms, which is a big monster. But at the moment, the electrical code only, the objective of that is to prevent shock, fire and injury. It doesn't take into consideration decades worth of scientific literature on the known health effects of electromagnetic fields. So I'd love to see some that happening one day. And then there's things like simple things like the health impacts of lighting. Like, it's all very well to go and light our homes with lots of LED lights, but making sure it's the right type of lighting. My home is the hideously bright white lights that can disrupt circadian rhythm, melatonin production. Melatonin plays a really important role in regulating excess estrogen, which is linked to breast cancer. So something as simple as making sure we're getting the lighting right in our homes can reduce our cancer risk.
Wow. So in terms of then people navigating those sort of fields, is that where then a building biologist comes really in handy in terms of thinking, okay, well, I know that the code is going to deal with this, this, and this, and then these are the other things that, you know, because it sounds like some of that actually might just be straight specification or review of an electrical layout or, you know, that kind of stuff. It's not like a really kind of something that will necessarily upend your whole design process completely.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something else that I guess I want to get across is, as I mentioned earlier, it wasn't until I, started the studies in building biology and then looked at the building science and realized that was the missing link. And I'm seeing the same thing in the building industry professionals that go through the mastermind. They've done a passive house certification. I actually had one builder say to me, Evan Graham, he said he thought that passive house was the be all and end all, but then he realized that building biology is actually a really important component to delivering a healthy built environment. So, and I get similar feedback from other people in the passive house space once they explore building biology. It's, if you want to create a healthy built environment, having one, like building science or building biology without the other, it's a bit like pizza without cheese.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, I think if you're making a really airtight home, that then you're ventilating through, natural ventilation and mechanical recovery ventilation, your indoor air quality becomes super important. It's really relevant for your personal health. And your indoor air quality, I mean, we spend, I think, 80 to 90% of our time indoors. Your indoor air quality is fundamentally impacted by the building materials, soft furnishings, surfaces covering, all of those kinds of things that you place in your home, and what their kind of composition is and how healthy they are. And so it's, like you think of, I think that people are starting to get this, but it is really important to obviously realize that those things go hand in hand. And like you say, to have a passive house understanding of how to build homes, but not understand the impact of the building materials you're choosing on that can be really problematic.
Yeah.
And so things like the foundation design for the sites and things like that, how do you suggest people kind of, I suppose, learn more about that or speak to their team about that to make sure that they're not going to run into problems with rising damp and those kinds of things?
Yeah, so potentially engaging a site drainage specialist. So really paying close attention to, the topography of the site and looking at where water's draining and collecting and making sure that you're not going to run into problems, and making sure there's really good draining and grading.
Drainage and grading.
Yes, thank you. So if you're building on a slope or your home's at the bottom of a hill, then the ideal foundation would be stumps. And then something else that's really important for the foundations that's come up twice is the importance of proper soil testing. And Dwayne, I was so excited to see Dwayne had spoke about this on an entire episode on his podcast. But I had a client who, she bought a brand new home, and proper soil testing, they hadn't taken the soil tests from the part of the site where the home is going to be built. So that part of the site had highly reactive clay soils, so it wasn't built on the right foundation, resulted in movement and cracking of the slab, black mold. She got very sick. They had to sell the family home in a community that they loved, and years later, she's still recovering from the health effects, and very, very stressful time. And so making sure that the soil testing is carried out properly so that the foundation's designed properly is really important.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, just from a risk management point of view, for making sure that you don't run into, I've had issues where the soil test wasn't done on the location that the project was, it was done like in another part of the yard, but that property was, it was at the beginning of like a hilly area in Brisbane. And so it was at the low end of the slope. And what was discovered is, as they basically started to dig footings where the extension was going, because they hadn't done the soil test there, this homeowner said that they started digging where the footings were going to go, and it just went into slop. And what was discovered was that the lowest part of the valley had actually been filled over the years through sediment and things like that, and then had been developed, and their property was sitting right on the edge of, you know, where that fill sort of went to. So the part where it had been tested was pretty solid, but the part where the extension was going was part of this sort of sedimentary fill. And so the cost to them to then redesign the footings at the point where the builders on site, times of the essence, you know, and you just kind of backed into a corner. So yeah, what I teach is that it's really important. Like, even if you have to pay for 2 soil tests, if you're doing a knockdown rebuild or you're doing an extension renovation that is going to require you to remove part of the house before you rebuild, then paying to have that soil test reconfirmed.
Yeah.
And also making sure that the tester brings the right equipment so that they've got access to where they need to, and that kind of stuff is super important.
Yeah.
So
I also had a builder say that the soil was on another project was given the wrong classification, and that had subsequent ramifications. So
yeah,
seems quite
definitely
common.
Now, for those that are working with architects and designers and builders, and they're really wanting to have a healthy home, what do you suggest that they look for in the professionals that they're going to work with? You know, the kinds of questions that they should ask before they choose, how they should go about auditing that they're getting the right advice, you know, all of those kinds of things to make sure that they're getting the outcome they want.
Yeah, I think a really good place to start is getting to know them as a person, their values, what kind of lifestyle they lead will give you some good clues as to whether or not they're going to be the right person for a healthy home project. And then I think getting a really good understanding of where they're at in terms of implementing the changes to the National Construction Code on their projects, their level of understanding about where the problems lie in terms of mould in new builds and what strategies they implement to reduce the risks. And then I think also, as we touched on before, I've learned some interesting lessons early on about, a family member was embarking on, he was building a holiday home in tropical North Queensland, and I had done the design brief for that project. The architect was really excited, said he was really excited and open to working together. But when it actually came down to the conversations around some of the design strategies and materials, I was looked at as though I had 2 heads. And I had to make a decision at that point to focus on the people who are ready to hear the information I've got to share. But I think getting an understanding of how open they are to information that they might not already be aware of is there an attitude of I've already, that they know everything, or they're open to like collaboration and bringing in experts where there might potentially be knowledge gaps, whether it's an EMF testing technician or someone with expertise in building science. And I think it's good to establish whether they've done any additional training since they became an architect or a builder, like have they got a passive house certification, or have they ever worked with a building biologist? It's not to say, don't go with them if they haven't done it already, but just getting a sense of where they're at in terms of their openness and willingness. And as you said before, something I've really noticed about the people that are upskilling in this space is this, they're out there networking and collaborating with and learning from other people in their industry as well. I think it's really important.
Yeah, it's something that I've noticed generally about, I feel like these changes to the National Construction Code, they've been driven by larger policy decisions around improvement of the practices in the construction industry, but also about targeting energy targets that we have as a country for 2030, 2040, 2050, and the domestic residential market being seen as an opportunity to reduce its energy requirements and all of those kinds of things. So that's part of the NatHERS whole of house energy 7-star rating. All of those kinds of things are feeding into that. And then it's also learnings from other locations like Canada and New Zealand with the leaky building syndrome. And then the livable housing guidelines incorporation, I think, are largely driven by just seeing the need to age in place becoming a lot more required for us as an aging population. You know, like, it's not like these have just been plucked out of nowhere. And so I think that what I've noticed from the industry is that you will see those who are totally embracing that we have been more than needing this. And so they've dived into the fact that, and been quite frustrated by perhaps some of the industry bodies not educating them the way that they need to. Because I think that particularly in the construction industry, the industry bodies have been focused on fighting the changes rather than getting everybody up to speed on them. And and that's why we're seeing sort of the difference in adoption state to state. And, you know, some political parties have made calls that aren't in alignment with other states and those kinds of things. So I've noticed generally that anybody in the industry who has a sustainability mindset in the way that they go about their work, they are much more collaborative because they're driven from values that are about improving everything for everyone. And it's not about, this is my slice of the pie. I need to protect my business. I need to protect my niche of income. I need to protect, you know, so, and it goes back as far as I remember when I had I first spoke about Passive House on the podcast. Gosh, it's got to be, you know, 3 or 4 years ago at least now. And I remember diving into that community and everybody was so keen to just share what they knew. And I was like, this is so refreshing and so exciting to see. And I think that that's what, if you can, as a homeowner, when you're talking with your industry professionals, you can start to see, are they willingly sharing? Are they seeking to educate you? Are they seeking to bring you up to speed on these things? Or are they being a little bit closed off? And, you know, and you'll also start to see, if you're following them on social media and on their website and things like that, do they come from an education mindset where they just want the industry to improve and they see that they play a role in that? Or are they trying to keep everything to themselves? So
what I'm witnessing on social media in terms of, them educating each other is amazing. It's a really exciting time to be. I know there's a lot of challenges in this industry, but it's also a really exciting time.
It is. It's so great to see so much momentum around it. Now, lastly, what do you think of the no-brainer, the quick win choices that really can impact a homeowner's health in their home and that are kind of fairly straightforward choices for them to make when that comes to their renovation or new build project?
Yeah, I think flooring choices are a big one. I've actually had a few people that have been experiencing various symptoms, and as soon as they've ripped their carpet up, they've noticed an immediate reduction in symptoms and also the amount of water that their dehumidifier has been collecting. So, and also if you're going with flooring, the floor finishes are a significant source of off-gassing. So if you can go for a natural oil wax finish rather than a toxic finish, that's going to make a big difference. And something that I'm really passionate about advocating for is hardwired internet. It's such an easy thing to do, to give people the option of not having radio frequency radiation constantly being emitted within the home and providing a sanctuary for our bodies to rest and repair. Also, I think considering the placement of solar panels is a big one. It's very quick to adopt all these measures for energy efficiency, but considering if you've got the option to put solar panels separate to the house on a garage, that would be the ideal option because the wiring in the panels emits dirty electricity. And if that's not an option, then you'd be better off, say, for instance, having them probably in a room that you're not spending a lot of time in during the day when they're going to be the most active. So there are some quite simple things that could make a big difference.
Oh, there's some great tips. Zara, I want to thank you so much for your time. Is there anything else that you want to add before we wrap up?
I know we've talked a lot about building science and passive house, but I think it is important to just say really explicitly that building high-performing, energy-efficient homes is about so much more than energy efficiency. It's actually really critical to managing condensation and mold risk, and that's why having people with those skills on your project is so important.
Yeah, I've seen Andy Marlowe from Envirotexture talking a lot lately about how we've got to stop talking about these things as high-performance homes. Like literally, they're just actually what homes should be doing. And it's just that it's not that these homes are radically better or different. It's just that our expectations of our homes has been beaten down to such a low level that it looks like such a dramatic difference. And I think that whatever happen, whenever we see big change happen, particularly in something that is as old as building and construction, it's always going to make everyone nervous, and it's always going to make people fearful. And when people are fearful, they can come out doing all sorts of, that can show up in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
But I think that what I love about this is that there are so many in the industry like yourself and like the builders that I know and architects and designers that are really seeking to help shoulder the burden of gaining the knowledge that they can then share, and also helping bring along people so that they can embrace this information, wrap their heads around it, and we can kind of improve the industry altogether. So
yes. And sorry, one other thing to add to that is that, whatever climate you're in, they're important skills to have, whether or not whether you're in Queensland, whether you want a passive house or not, you want the people working on your project to at least have those skills.
Yeah, I think that that's the thing. People hear passive house and they sort of just check it out and say, no, I don't want that. But there's so much to be learned from how passive house tackles building and construction. I mean, you can't, we've talked a lot about passive solar on Undercover Architect, and it's something that I harp on and on and on about, because I want everybody to always design a house with an understanding of the movement of the sun. And because I think that that's just a completely, it just gets you so far ahead in terms of solving so many problems in the lifestyle in the home and how the home performs. And then there's these other layers that you can add. And I think that taking cues, don't shut out. When you hear passive house, don't shut out and say that's not for me. Look to the things that happen in a passive house build process, in a detailing process, and see how they could potentially inform what's going to be suitable for your climate, your budget, and the way that you go about your project. And I think, as you said, Zara, earlier, really thinking about what your wall composition is, how the insulation and the wall wrap works, so that you can make a building envelope that does the job that it needs to and doesn't cause you long-term health or durability or longevity problems with your home, is super important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to pop all the links to you and your information in the resources so people can check that out. And for anybody in the industry that's listening, Zara does a huge amount to help educate the industry as well. So make sure you check out those resources too. Thank you so much for your time, Zara. It's been absolutely brilliant to have you here.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm so grateful.